Hello, in this video we will discuss about the central and peripheral action of ghrelin, and we will also learn about the cortisol action due to the sympathetic nervous system activation. So let's begin to understand from the empty stomach, because ghrelin we will discuss here, the ghrelin will release due to the empty stomach due to the fasting state. So this is a person which that contain empty stomach, and this will produce the ghrelin into the blood circulatory system. So that is why it is known as the endocrine hormone. When go into the ghrelin into the blood circulatory system, so it is also known as the hunger hormone. It is released due to the hungry state, and after this it will target to the pituitary gland through a hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. After this pituitary gland, which that will trigger to the growth hormone. So remember, this growth hormone very important for the regulation and modulation of the insulin production. For example, it will be bound with the insulin receptor, will lead to produce the insulin from the beta cell. So that is why an insulin will move into the blood circulatory system for increase the hunger due to the hypoglycemia, the low level of glucose. Because the insulin is anabolic hormone which that will trigger and bind with a different tissue, will influx of the glucose into the tissue for decrease the blood glucose level into the blood circulatory system, will lead to hypoglycemia, and this hypoglycemia will lead to trigger the brain for the hungry state. So let's begin to understand. Here is the stomach. The stomach basically contain the endocrine cell. This enteroendocrine cell will be release the ghrelin, and it basically it will ghrelin will inactive form, which that we convert through a O-acyl transferase enzyme to convert the acyl ghrelin. This acyl ghrelin will enter into the blood circulatory system, and this acyl ghrelin will target to the brain, and it will pass the blood-brain barrier into the brain cells. After this, it will trigger the several pathway we will discuss also, and will lead to trigger the craving and appetite, ingestion more from the food if we will intake food after empty stomach. So let's begin to understand the whole mechanism. This was the overview. This is I am drawing the brain bigger picture for understanding. So the bigger circle is showing that it is contain a hypothalamus, and on the other hand the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, and in this way here is you can see the anterior pituitary. Here is anterior pituitary will release the adrenocorticotropic hormone, but in this case here is the ventral tegmental area, and this is the NAC is the nucleus accumbens, and it's contain ghrelin receptor. Each cell here is the nuclei. This is the neuron. Remember, because it is present in the nervous system, the central nervous system, and here is the arcuate nucleus AN, and paraventricular nucleus contain neuropeptide Y, which that will trigger to GABA for inhibition. And here is the nucleus tractus solitary NTS and medulla oblongata. Nucleus tractus solitarius, which that will be which that will target to the Edinger Westphal nucleus for binding with the ghrelin. So this is the spinal cord, and this is the stomach, which that is enteroendocrine cell, basically the vagal nerve, which that will be bound with the ghrelin receptor are present. The acyl ghrelin will be bound. After the unacylated ghrelin we convert into the ghrelin O acylated transferase enzyme to produce acyl ghrelin. It will target to the nerve, and this nerve is the vagus nerve. This is the afferent vagus nerve, will travel to the dorsal horn of the ganglion of the peripheral nervous system, will lead to central nervous system into the dorsal horn of gray matter, will move through a nodose ganglion. This nodos ganglion is basically the afferent vagus nerve, will target to the NTS. This NTS is basically the medulla oblongata. After this go into the nucleus tractus solitarius, and in this way it will target to the AN. This is the acute nucleus, which that will release the neuropeptide Y, and after this neuropeptide Y, it will trigger the appetite and ingestion if the food are present. So this is present in the hypothalamus, and this is the downward is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal present, which that will lead to produce the corticotropic releasing factor from the paraventricular nucleus. So this is the cortisol as well as the acetylcholine, which that will be regulate. If the cortisol will increase, so it will lead to acetylcholine will be decrease. So here is the insulin will increase in the blood circulation also, and this is the ventral tegmental area which that bind the ghrelin, and after this ghrelin bind, that ghrelin will bind will lead to trigger the cortisol, and the ghrelin when increase the cortisol will increase, not antagonistic but same the directly proportion, will lead to paraventricular nucleus to release the NPY, and the GABA will produce the corticotropic releasing factor, in the anterior pituitary lead to adrenocorticotropic releasing hormone production from the AP neuron, will lead to stress also increase the adrenal cortex, lead to produce cortisol. So this is on the other hand the dopamine release from the mesolimbic pathway. This mesolimbic pathway will release the dopamine release from the nucleus accumbens, and this nucleus accumbens and the will trigger to release the dopamine, and this dopamine will release to craving and alcohol, more consumption, reward and motivation. So on the other hand, remember this is the ventral tegmental area will trigger after the binding with the acetylcholine to trigger the nucleus accumbens will trigger the mesolimbic pathway, which that will lead to craving alcohol. The limbic system will be activated. So the acute alcohol, active drinking, chronic alcohol use disorder, and abstinence in chronic alcohol use disorder, which that is basically chronic alcohol use disorder will trigger and increase this acetylcholine will increase the appetite related to the alcohol consumption, while on the other hand the food consumption also. So this is the mesolimbic pathway, which that is the limbic system will regulate the food. So when cortisol will increase more, so the sympathetic nervous system will increase, will lead to increase the gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis, and lipolysis will normalize and decrease the hunger. So for example, here is the stomach, which that release the ghrelin into the blood circulatory system will function differently. Let's begin to understand one by one with the organ level. So this is the pancreas, basically modulation of insulin secretion and inhibit glucagon, while the brain after the long-term ghrelin production will lead to decrease the insulin and inhibit the insulin, while the promotion of glucagon will lead to craving decrease, inhibition of craving. While here the brain regulation of appetite, adiposity, growth hormone release, and energy homeostasis. In this way, the brain will trigger the lipolysis or lipogenesis on the basis of requirement. If we will intake food, so direct lipogenesis will be occur, while the lipolysis will be occur in the adipose tissue. So that is why that different mechanism. For example, the leptin will produce from the adipose tissue. We will not understand, but later in the next video we will discuss. So here the cardiovascular system, the cardiac output will be increased, while the blood pressure will be decreased, and cardioprotection. And skeletal muscle regulation of energy and consumption, and liver increase the gluconeogenesis and fatty acid synthesis if the long term. So the several cell type, which are inhibition of apoptosis and the cell growth, inflammation and regulation of cell and proliferation and differentiation. which that will be inhibit. So in this way, the apoptosis will be inhibited, so the cell will be going to the rest. So remember the gastrointestinal tract, the regulation of acid and secretion and motility. Motility will be increased, will feel the craving of the sugar or something. So when we will intake the food, so the ghrelin will be decreased while the leptin will produce from the adipose tissue for the relaxation, and we will feel the fulfillment into the after the sensation of the brain, and the parasympathetic nervous system activation due to the intake of food. So the rest and digest mechanism will be occur. So in this way, remember, the brain is the central regulatory center for the appetite, hunger, and the satiety pathway. So I hope you make sense about this video. This was the central and peripheral action of ghrelin, cortisol, and their homeostasis. So thanks for watching.